Welcome to the Power and Market Report. I'm Albert Liu. I'm very happy to be joined today by Professor Joseph Salerno, who is the editor of the Quarterly Journal of Austrian Economics and academic vice president of the Mises Institute. Dr. Salerno, I'm very happy to have you joining me. Welcome to the Power and Market Report, and how are you?
Fine, and thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
You wrote a very interesting piece recently on Donald Trump, and I feel almost guilty inviting an expert on monetary economics on the program like you and then talking about something as mundane as politics. But you did make some very good points in that piece, and we had a debate this last week, the CNBC Republican primary debate, so I think it's on point here. And basically the underlying message of your piece was that, look, he's making some good points on economic bubbles and the Federal Reserve, and we should pay attention to what he says, even if he is Donald Trump, even if you don't think he is a serious candidate or a serious political or economic expert. You should pay attention to what this person has to say.
Yes, that's correct. I have no particular brief on his behalf. I do notice, though, that on occasion he makes very sensible observations and suggestions, and I thought that the point he made about this bubble that we're having in IPOs was really important, and that he understands that the Fed has kept interest rates at a zero level, and that has not rejuvenated the economy, has not re-energized the economy.
And it's interesting how he obviously is a billionaire real estate developer. And I've noticed that it's often the case that these people who are very successful in business, either through running companies or developers, as Mr. Trump is, they have some kind of intuitive understanding of business cycles. So, for example, it's pretty well known that the IPOs that tend to come out after a big string of IPOs tend to be the worst ones. This is sort of a classic point in Benjamin Graham's Intelligent Investor, that the quality, the deteriorating quality of public offerings tends to be the hallmark of a bubble that's getting ready to collapse.
Yeah, it's what happens is, of course, the best people get in early, and then other people have their appetites whetted for big profits, and it's easier for those people who really don't know what they're doing in issuing IPOs to get in later on, much later on, when there's this great hunger, it's great clamor for people to get in.
And then obviously you have probably lower quality issues trying to take advantage of that exuberance, correct?
That's exactly correct.
Okay, so the other point that you made, or that you pointed out that Trump observed, is that the Fed is not necessarily acting in the best interest of the greater economy. It's not looking out for the little guy or even the economy on a whole. In fact, according to the article, he said that he accuses the Fed of trying to shield the incumbent administration from basically a collapsing bubble and a recession that would follow.
Yeah, in fact, what he's done is he's hit upon, in his own way, what economists call the political business cycle. That is that incumbent administrations do not want a recession within a year before an election, because either they themselves, if they're running, will be thrown out, or their party will lose. Because Americans, studies have been done, and Americans have about a 1-year memory on the economy. So if there has been a recession within that year before the election, that party tends to lose. That happened to the first George Bush, that happened to Jimmy Carter, and it also happened to Gerald Ford. So you lose a lot of votes if there's been a recession within a year of the election.
Now, this is one thing that I've wondered, perhaps you can shed some light on this, but why would the current Fed board have any allegiance to an administration that's basically on its way out the door? I presume that Janet Yellen will be kept on by whomever is the next leader. Why would she, for instance, if it's going to be the Republicans, why would she do something now to support the Democrats?
The reason is because you don't, as the Fed, you do not want to be accused of partisanship, right? I mean, their mantra is that we are above politics and therefore we should be independent of the federal government. So you don't want to upset either party, because remember, Congress created the Fed, and Congress can alter the terms on which the Fed operates. Right now, there's no congressional oversight. But if one party feels that the Fed has been partisan and it's caused that party to lose an election as a result, especially the presidential election, then that party can begin to introduce bills and so on in Congress to move towards controlling the Fed, reining it in.
Very interesting. Okay. I want to turn our attention for a short moment to the debate we had this week. In the pre-interview, we were discussing it. You told me you didn't watch it, and my response would be good for you. You had something much better to do. I didn't watch it live, but I did catch it later on YouTube. And I have to admit, maybe shamefully, that it was incredibly entertaining. And you know, I am not I'm not deluded to think that this is ultimately going to change anything. But there was a ton of entertainment value. So I just want to go over some of the points that I jotted down. Get your take on them.
Sure.
My first is that, of course, the people on the end, the people on the fringe, so that would be Jeb Bush, Rand Paul, Mike Huckabee, these people were completely invisible. And it's, I guess it's kind of a shame that I would include Rand Paul among them, but they were just totally invisible. The other point is that I guess, you know, in the spirit of your piece on Trump, whether I like any of these candidates or not, many of them actually made good points. And so, for example, Marco Rubio was at one point attacked by Jeb Bush, and he turned to him flatly and said, look, you're attacking me because someone has convinced you, one of your advisors, that attacking me is going to help you. And I thought that was very telling, and kind of perhaps maybe exposed Jeb Bush not as a thinker, but just as a political robot or puppet.
I agree. And I think the American people have seen through Jeb Bush. Finally, there's some insight on the part of the public that they care enough to actually look beyond what these candidates are saying. And so I think Bush's decline, just from again, I'm not in favor or against him, but just from the point of view of the political IQ of the American public was gratifying to me.
Yeah. Okay. So turning now to Donald Trump, I'm going to play a clip a little bit later, but he was attacked viciously, not just by some of the people on the stage, but by the moderators. It was kind of a pathetic display, actually. And I thought he handled himself quite well. Was quite the gentleman. And it's kind of funny when you have a stage full of politicians that one of the moderators would come out as sort of the least likable person in the room.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that even happened when they were on Fox also. So it is startling that the politicians, from what I've read, came off much better in the last debate than the moderators did. I mean, that's really outrageous. It really says something about the establishment media, that they don't want any divergence from sort of the central message of the establishment, which is bigger government, more interference in people's lives, and so on. Anybody who wanders off message is attacked.
Right. So now Dr. Carson, he made a good point. He was sort of attacked on his position on same-sex marriage, and I forget the wording of the question, but it was sort of like, they didn't say this, but it was, why do you hate gays so much? It was basically the spirit. And his answer was, I thought it was quite good. I may hold a position on same-sex marriage. That doesn't mean I have anything against the gay community. And he said that, why we have to remember that who the real enemy is. These people tend to turn us against each other. He may have been talking about the Republicans on stage, but he may have also been speaking to just Americans in general. Remember who the enemy is. It's not who you think it is. Oftentimes the media is turning us against each other.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. It's not only the media, but it's the government. It's the intellectuals. They're all trying to classify everyone, so that there's fighting between genders and between people with different sexual preferences or inclinations and so on. And there really are only two classes in society, and that is the class that consumes taxes, the class that lives off other people's earnings, and the class that produces real wealth. That has always been the breakdown in society. That is the two classes in society, no matter what kind of political structure you have, monarchy or democracy or dictatorship.
I want to move to Carly Fiorina now. I think she may have not done very well in the debate in terms of helping her candidacy, but I thought she said some very good things about crony capitalism. She basically explained to the people that once government gets very large and very powerful, the only thing that a business can do to protect itself is to also get very big, very powerful, and amass lobbying power. And she pointed to all of these mergers going on, I think in particular in healthcare, but in other areas as well, that this is basically a survival strategy for the companies. And it's very rare that someone will point that out. And I'm really glad that she did.
Yeah, I agree with you. And Trump has done the same thing. That's one of the good things about Trump. That, he's very forthcoming in saying, look, I pay politicians to do what I ask them to do. And in today's world, where we have huge government and government is involved in every aspect of business, that's one of the only ways that is the only way you can survive. So Microsoft, which used to not have any lobbyists up until a few years ago, now has a huge lobby, in Washington.
Right, and then actually an overarching theme. Anytime that regulation was mentioned, anytime that the Federal Reserve was mentioned, the knee-jerk response or the planned response, the calculated response by all of the candidates was to say we don't need, except for maybe Jeb Bush, we don't need more regulation, we don't need the Fed, the Fed's job is not to do this and that, it's just to give us sound money. Is this a good thing? Perhaps it doesn't matter in the end, in the sense that whoever is the winner of this is going to become the establishment candidate and is going to run from this. But is it good that at least at this level, people are raising these issues and the public is being alerted to, or at least their feelings are being validated in a sense by what's going on the stage?
Right. I think that the fact that this rhetoric is repeated again and again is a good thing. This occurred during the Reagan administration, during Reagan's campaigns. Unfortunately, it didn't pan out. He didn't cut government spending. He didn't really cut taxes. He cut some marginal rates, but overall taxation went up under Reagan. But we can't hear too much of this. I think eventually this is going to light a fire under the American public.
I like that. We can't hear enough of this. Now, Ted Cruz was probably the most outspoken when it came to the Federal Reserve. He talked about sound money, and he used the words preferably money backed with gold. Do you think this is something that's resonating, or is this him just trying to scoop up what remains of Rand Paul's following?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm suspicious that this is really not yet resonating with the public. I mean, they're worried about the Fed. They know a little bit about quantitative easing, and people are getting hit, especially older people and retired people, with the zero interest rates. So they know vaguely there is something wrong with the Fed. I don't think they've seized on the fact yet that it's really the fact that the Fed is producing fiat money, and that's the problem, that we have to bind the hands of the Fed with what used to be called golden handcuffs. That is, a money that can't be inflated.
So when does the public, I'm just curious, when do you think the public clues in on this? Do we have to have inflation rates nearing 200, 300, 400% a year or more? Is that when people figure it out?
No, not necessarily, because I think in the next year or two, we're going to have another financial crisis. And we have a very fragile financial system. Even though we don't have consumer price inflation, we certainly do have asset price inflation in the stock market, in IPOs and student loans, and so on. So we are on very thin ice, and the Fed is continuing to increase the money supply. So what I think is going on is that we will see something happening, some sort of crisis that will bring everything to a head.
Okay. I think some people are saying that Marco Rubio won that debate, and this is the first debate I've really watched, and I have to say he is a smooth cat. I mean, he is really smooth. His delivery is excellent. I can see why some people would be drawn to him. I'm wondering if it's unfortunate for him that that his time has come now, in the sense that if we hadn't been hoodwinked so recently by a young, smooth-talking politician with a great smile, he might have a chance. But I think that may be too recent in the American public's memory. What do you think about Marco Rubio's chance? Do you have an opinion on that?
No, I don't. I didn't. He didn't really catch my eye early on, so I really haven't followed him closely. I do notice, though, that he's a very smooth speaker. He has very good rhetoric, but I don't know how that's going to play out.
Okay. Well, I don't know if he was the winner of the debate, but in my opinion, anyone who hates mainstream cable news or CNBC really got a treat last night, because the candidates were just laying into them, and the audience was right there. You haven't seen it, so I want to play a clip for you and the viewers, and then we'll talk about it briefly before we move on to something a little bit more meaningful.
And make Americans better off, because your greatness would replace the stupidity and incompetence of others.
That's right.
Let's be honest. Is this a comic book version of a presidential campaign?
It's not a comic book, and it's not a very nicely asked question, the way you say that.
As alluded to earlier, scored your tax plan and concluded that you give nearly twice as much of a gain in after-tax income to the top 1% as to people in the middle of the income scale. Since you're the champion of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, don't you have that backwards?
No, you're wrong. In fact, the largest after-tax gains is for the people at the lower end of the tax spectrum under my plan. And there's a bunch of things my tax plan does to help them. Number one, you have people in this country...
Tax Foundation, just to be clear, they said the gains after tax income...
You wrote a story on it, and you had to go back and correct it. You did.
I did not.
Oh, you did.
No.
And so...
Does your opposition to it show that you're not the kind of problem solver American voters want?
Let me say something at the outset. The questions that have been asked so far in this debate illustrate why the American people don't trust the media. This is not a cage match. And you look at the questions. Donald Trump, are you a comic book villain? Ben Carson, can you do math? John Kasich, will you insult two people over here? Marco Rubio, why don't you resign? Jeb Bush, why have your numbers fallen? How about talking about the substantive issues people care about?
That was kind of a climactic point of the evening, if you ask me. And that was mostly John Harwood asking those questions. Horrible questions. And just imagine, there are so many that I didn't play. But if you were a viewer and you were interested in learning more about, say, Mr. Huckabee, and he's one of those people who's on the ends of the stage, doesn't get much time as it is, maybe 3 questions. And one of the questions is about Donald Trump. Do you think that he has the moral standing to be president? I mean, just horrible questions. And his questioning of Chris Christie was dreadful, kept interrupting him. And I think Mr. Christie, his biggest contribution, perhaps his only contribution to the night, was to stand up to him and say, that's considered rude even in New Jersey. That was a beautiful moment. The mainstream media, I was going to say, I think Disney owns ABC, but CNBC came across as the Mickey Mouse network that night.
That's for sure.
Yeah. So to finish off, though, I want to ask you this. If you look at the field of the Republicans in this election, you have 2 doctors, you have a high-tech executive, you have a real estate billionaire. On paper, this is actually a pretty impressive field. I mean, it's not all career politicians and trial lawyers. Do you think this is a good thing? Is the field actually improving, or are Americans actually interested in having, I guess, not regular people, but outsiders participating in the political process at this point?
Yes, I think it's very, very heartening to see outsiders, people that are actually working, people that are involved in business, even if it's at a much higher level, who understand the problems of the productive middle class and who can speak their language. Now, that's not to say that they might not eventually turn out to be demagogues, but yet again, it speaks to the rising political IQ of the American public. I think this is a wonderful development.
Okay, and finally, before we move on, I like to do this. I like to ask economists to make predictions because I know how much you hate to do that. Who do you think is going to win this primary, and then who's going to go on and be the next president?
I have no clue. I have a sneaking suspicion that someone in the middle is going to come up, and it's not going to be Carson or Trump. But you know, if you ask me, maybe a Rubio. I don't know. Somebody who's a little bit more polished and can really run for the long term. That's not to say that they would be the best person.
Right. Interesting. That would signal perhaps Ted Cruz or Rubio. Okay, good. Well, thank you for that. Let's go back and talk about something else you wrote. You had an article actually today, but you had one sometime back about basically the war against cash. It was called Why the Government Hates Cash. This appears to be a trend. Probably a lot of people don't understand what's going on and the motives behind it. Can you talk about that a little bit? First of all, why does the government hate cash?
There's a number of reasons. The ostensible reason, and to some extent it's true, the government wants to crack down on illegal drugs. They want to crack down on tax evasion. And so since cash leaves no trail, they want payments to be made electronically so that they can have records, so there's a paper trail or an electronic trail. But now that hides the fact that the government hates cash for another reason, and maybe more important reason. And it's actually a dual reason. One is that cash, the fact that you and I can withdraw cash from our checking accounts, is something that keeps the banking system and the government in check. In other words, if there's too much inflation in the economy, if we have bubbles and the bubbles begin to blow up and burst, people pull cash out of banks. That's why Washington Mutual collapsed. That's why Northern Rock in Great Britain had to be bailed out by government. So getting rid of cash makes banks run-proof. That is, if there is no cash in the system and people must make payments by deposits, then there's no reasons for them to withdraw their cash during a crisis. But second, and more importantly, is the fact that all governments and central banks are moving towards the idea that, look, to get people to spend money, to get us out of the economic doldrums that we still have as a hangover from our financial crisis, we have to be able to make interest rates negative. So if in Sweden, interest rates are negative 0.35%. But the banks have not passed that interest rate on to their depositors. Because if they start to pay negative interest rates to the depositors, it means that depositors are going to have to pay money. And they'll pull the cash out of the banks rather than have to pay a certain amount every year. So what the thinking is, and it's Keynesian thinking, the thinking is that if we can get rid of cash, then money is stuck in the banks. You get paid through direct deposits. Your wages, your salaries, your dividends come through direct deposits. The only way you can escape negative interest rate is by spending money. And so the economic belief is that, in fact, by most mainstream economists, if you can get people to spend more, we will get the economy moving again. We'll get the world out of the economic doldrums. Europe's in a recession. China has a sliding rate of growth. The rate of growth in the U.S. just this week, it turns out, is quite slow. So they want to spend more money. That's the old Keynesian notion.
Yeah, and it's a ridiculous notion. But basically, what you're saying is that they want to turn banks into money jail, basically, where your money goes in and is stuck and can't come out. If they do that, I mean, people are not everyone is stupid. People are going to spend, but there are only so many haircuts you can get. There's only so many TVs a person can watch. People are going to start spending their money on money substitutes, aren't they? And maybe not gold, because they'll probably make that illegal. But aren't people just going to seek out other monetary substitutes?
Yeah, that's what they'll try to do. I mean, everyone will seek out, maybe art, collectibles, and so on. And there'll be a big, a waste of resources in doing that, right? Because that absorbs real people that have to do work in coming up with these money substitutes and so on. So it'll reduce the growth of the economy. But still, as you called it, money jail, those deposits that they spend, they're going to have to go to someone else, and they're going to be held in that bank. So what they're hoping to do is to speed up spending in that way.
Right, right.
That's the only way you
Now,
can escape.
in the article, you mentioned that Sweden has actually gone the furthest in this. What types of things are going on there, and is this what we can expect here?
Yeah, well, to answer the first part, 4 of the 5 banks now will no longer handle money in their offices, so that you can't withdraw or deposit money within the bank's offices. You can still withdraw money and deposit through ATM machines. But very recently, it turns out now that they're closing down ATMs even in very remote rural areas where people really depend on cash. And so there's been a movement, backlash against all of this. So there's a growing resistance, and one of the funny anecdotes that was told in the article today was that in fact you have people hiding money in their microwaves. So I titled my article, "In Sweden, Money's Becoming Radioactive." So you're getting those types of things, and there was one man who paid for I think $11,000, equivalent of $11,000 or $12,000 of appliances that he used money from an inheritance to get. The owner of the store called the police. Police came to his house. He showed the police the letter saying that he had the inheritance. They still seized his bank account, and I believe they took him. They arrested him. He had to go to the police station. Things were finally cleared up a few days later, but it's gone that far. In fact, one of the statements that was made recently by the head of a security industry lobby was that if you're paying money, you're doing something wrong. That's the attitude in Scandinavia right now.
Wow, and I know you're a economic historian. This is not exactly the same thing, but the idea of taking away ATMs and taking away traditional money banking services from retail branches sounds to me like the old wildcat banking, where you would hide your branches really far away, so people couldn't, you didn't have to outlaw cash withdrawals. You would just put the banks in places where people couldn't get to them.
Yeah, literally, it's the same model. That's a very good point.
Yeah. Okay. It's and the other thing I noticed is that your comment about the banking model changing in Sweden and not handling cash. I saw a commercial recently on TV, and I'm inclined to say it was Citibank, but I'm not exactly sure. But they were basically boasting about their remodeled banks. Have you seen this? About how their branches have changed and how they have lounges and coffee machines, and they want you to come, free Wi-Fi, and they want you to come in and hang out at the bank. And I think this is part of the same thing. It's kind of trying to capitalize on this new cafe culture and essentially saying things like, look, old banking is obsolete. We don't need things like money and vaults and reserves and gold. Just come here and have an espresso and talk to one of our people about getting a credit card.
Yeah, and all the while that they have your deposits locked in electronic form that you can't withdraw. Right, cash is old-fashioned. That's how gold coins were driven out of circulation even before FDR suspended the gold standard in 1933. Even in the 1920s, there's a big propaganda campaign that you are very old-fashioned if you use gold coins instead of Federal Reserve notes or checks.
Now, of course, people have ways of circumventing laws like this, and in China they have pretty strict loosening, but still strict restrictions on how much money people can take out. Savvy, wealthy Chinese know how to use Hong Kong, and there's various ways of getting your money there. Are you seeing anything like that developing in the West, like for instance in Sweden, or aside from the microwave oven as a safe? Is there anything else like that going on?
Outside of Italy, where people have been hiding money for decades and decades, there's a very big underground economy in Italy and always was. I don't really see that in the Northern European countries, where compliance tends to be much greater and just taken as a matter of course that you comply with government edicts. So no, unfortunately, I have not been seeing that. I haven't been reading about that.
Yeah, I would be surprised if something like that doesn't start to develop. These troubles, they breed creativity. So thank you. I guess we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope to talk to you again.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
My guest has been Dr. Joseph Salerno. Please visit his website at Mises.org. And don't forget to visit powerandmarket.com for insightful interviews with the world's leading experts in economics, finance, and investing. Next up, Dr. Keith Smith, the co-founder of the Surgery Center of Oklahoma. This is the Power and Market Report.